Good morning, everybody. So for today's tip, I figured I would do a little tour of the folder structure that you get from a new Phoenix application. So this application was created with mix phoenix.new pathfinder -- live. And so now we're just going to kind of walk the folder structure and talk a little bit about it. So at the very top, you'll have _build. This is an artifact folder, so you really shouldn't have to go in there that much. In fact, if you're using VS Code or some other tool, you can probably hide it. Similarly, .elixir _ls. ls stands for language server. These are artifacts that help systems like Dialyzer to understand type specs. That's something you're not going to really work in that much either. The first real meaningful folder is the assets folder. And because this is a Phoenix app and it's a web application, there are lots of assets related to web development. First, we've got the CSS folder, and then we've got the JS folder. Now, these files will be compiled into the final delivered artifact. So like the compressed, minimized JS, and then the CSS. So that's part of like the build system. So if you're editing CSS, you can kind of do it up here, but just keep in mind that those will be compiled. In fact, the entire asset system kind of leans on Webpack to do its management of stuff. You can kind of see the Webpack configuration file here, and also like the node module. So you got package.json, which describes all the different packages and stuff that we use, and so forth. So static is actually a kind of what it sounds like. It is a static collection of assets. So these will be copied into the root of the deliverable like project. So if you have just like raw images or even raw CSS or JS files that you want to live at the root of your project, you can put them into static, and then they will be copied later appropriately. So underneath assets, you've got configuration. So you've got your root config file, and then you've got your different environmental augmentations of the configuration for development, production, and testing. They also give you kind of a sample of production.secret.exs. As I say in the comments, this is something that you typically will not commit to the GitHub source versioning, but this is kind of provided as a sample. Next, we've got dependencies, which again, this is kind of like an artifact folder. So we define our dependencies inside mix exs, and then what'll happen is when you run mix deps get, it'll pull down all the dependencies and kind of store them in here. So normally day to day, you won't be working in dependencies. Then you've got lib, and this is actually the heart of the application. This is where most of the stuff lives. So Phoenix has a pattern out of the box that will encourage you to kind of keep all of your application business domain logic in one context called Pathfinder, and then keep your web-specific code in Pathfinder Web. And so the idea here is that Pathfinder Web has things like controllers and templates and views, and even this live folder for live view things. But then the idea is that these controllers and live views are all calling the Pathfinder modules to kind of do the core business logic. And then Pathfinder Web is just for the web stuff. In addition, you've got things like router. This lets you kind of define all of your specific routes for your web application. getText is a tool to help for internationalization. Endpoints kind of set up all the connection and plug stuff that you'll be dealing with. And then you've got some stub files for Pathfinder Web and Pathfinder so they can kind of load all their content. Next, we've got priv. Priv has a couple things. The first is getText content. getText is a translation tool. So you can kind of wrap static text in your application, and then you can create a kind of translation internationalization bundle inside of getText. Then you've got Repo. This is going to hold all of your initial seed data. So if you want to, you can create kind of an initial scenario for your web application and document it in seed. And then as you start to build out migrations, they'll be stored here as well. Then you've got static. Static is actually the compiled result of the stuff that lives in assets. So you can see app CSS, and then some Phoenix images. So you typically don't work inside of here. Those are typically managed inside of the assets folder. And then you've got test, and test basically encourages you to follow test design practices. So they start you off with a test folder for Pathfinder Web, and they give you some stub test for different parts of the Phoenix system. The general recommendation is that you should kind of mirror your lib directory underneath test. So if you've got Pathfinder Web and test, like you got Pathfinder Web inside of lib, and so I would imagine over time you'd build a Pathfinder folder under test and kind of like mirror those two file structures. In addition to the test suites themselves, you've got support files. So you've got a test helper, which kind of gets everything running. And then you've got specific cases. These are customized for specific Phoenix testing responsibilities. So if you want to test a web connection, you can use connection case. If you want to test something that's limited to the database, you can use a data case. And if you want to test something that deals with WebSockets and channels, you can deal with the channel case. Then to close it up, we've got a couple extra files here on the root of the project. We've got format exs, which helps set up some formatting, git ignore mix exs, which is the main mix configuration file for the project. You can see things like here, like the version and the Elixir version that we need to kind of run this application. And then as you process mix exs with like deps-get, you'll generate a mix.lock file, and that'll have the hashes for all of the specific dependencies you've pulled in. And then finally have a default readme file, which kind of gets you started with how to run the application, set up your database, set up a node, and all those other things. So